This is truly a we the people's agenda. The outcome document is called, quote, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And it is a roadmap to ending global poverty, building a life of dignity for all, and leaving no one behind.
That was Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, commenting on the General Assembly's endorsement of these development goals. They'll be adopted in September and will remain in place until 2030. Welcome back to The World Over. While the Sustainable Development Goals target poverty and address climate change, my next guest says there's another agenda no one is talking about. He claims the soon-to-be-approved UN goals will bring abortion on demand to developing countries around the globe. And an unexpected nation-state is now supporting the goals. Congressman Chris Smith, the co-chair of the House Pro-Life Caucus, joined us earlier for this explosive exclusive. Watch. The UN is prepared to pass these 15-year development goals. Why should anyone care what the UN does or decides? How does that impact us? I'm sure that's what most of the people at home are thinking.
You know, to most of the world, especially the developing world, the UN is almost like a life or death situation for them. The funding that comes, if they have refugees, they need refugee money. And for the developing world, the UN is almost like another government, if not a major government for them. You know,
this is truly
these goals, which will begin January 1st in the year 2030. In mid to a latter part of September, all of the heads of state, prime ministers, presidents will convene in New York, and they will celebrate the launch of these goals. And here's some of the things they're going to say. It's a call to action to change our world. The goals are the agenda for global action over the next 15 years. They also say that no one must be left behind. And the big problem is an entire segment of humanity, unborn children, are left behind, left out, and put at grave risk of abortion on demand through the promotion of abortion that's embedded in the language of this.
Let's talk up, we're going to put on screen two of these targets that are particularly problematic and that you've identified as real challenges here. Target 3.7, it says by 2030, ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, including for family planning, information and education, and the integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. That means what?
Well, that means that it's not defined, but it is defined. It's just like here when people talk about choice, freedom of choice, reproductive rights. It has plain meaning in the NGO community, the non-governmental organizations, and especially plain meaning in the UN bureaucracy. The WHO put out this massive call to action on abortion and sexual issues. And here's what they said. Sexual health today encompasses access to abortion. Planned Parenthood said there is good news as there is Target, this is International Planned Parenthood Federation based in London, the big one. There is good news as there is a target for sexual and reproductive health under the health goal and reproductive rights under the gender goal. Planned Parenthood is the largest purveyor of abortion globally. In our country, they've done well over 7 million abortions, 230,000 every year. And we all know the latest outrage, the latest scandal, where they're crushing babies in a way that procures intact organs for sale and marketing, trafficking in baby body parts. This organization, all the treaty bodies at the UN, like even the Convention on the Rights of the Child Implementation Committee, they went after the Vatican and said they have to change canon law to include abortion. They've recently gone after Spain and said that where there's a parental notification effort, because they're trying to do that, that's called a barrier, and that's what WHO and UN Population Fund, all these alphabet soup agencies, they are surging every day of the week. They've hijacked, frankly, the development agenda, because there are a lot of things in the goals, Raymond, that are good. Eradicate poverty, global hunger. There even has a trafficking section or mention. I wrote the trafficking laws for the United States of America, the landmark law in the year 2000. I take a backseat to no one. It is the law. It is prevention, prosecution, and protection, the 3 Ps of trafficking.
Yeah.
There's a mention of it here. But again, the abortion piece is integrated.
It's woven into the whole thing.
And it's woven in. And as you said, these goals also make the point that it needs to be integrated into the national programs. The health has to all be incorporated. I don't know how the Pope, when he speaks at the UN, can in any way endorse these goals without a major section in his speech where he says this is unacceptable.
Well, I want to get to that in a moment because there's more on that thread. But let's go to this other target. I want you to explore this, and then we'll move on to who's supporting this how. Target 5.6, it says ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights as agreed in accordance with the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the Beijing Platform for Action and the outcome documents of their review conferences. Now, you were in Beijing. You and I were together in Cairo.
Exactly.
There was a battle royale then to insert this language, universal access to sexual and reproductive health. The Vatican strived mightily under John Paul II to bring together South American countries, Muslim countries, to defeat it. It was stripped.
As both you and I know, without Pope, now St. John Paul II, we would have had an international right to abortion. That's what the Clinton administration was pushing. I was there. I was part of that delegation, but a very much unwanted part of it because the Republicans got to pick a few members that could go. I lobbied along with the Vatican and like-minded countries, and a huge victory was gleaned at both Beijing and before that in Cairo in 1994. The problem is that began a 20-year push every year at the review conferences to expand the language, to get more of these UN agencies and regional agencies or bodies like the African Union and others to buy into this abortion agenda. 20 years later, now we're talking about universal access. You know how that is described by the UN Population Fund? They describe that as anybody who is 15 years of age or older. WHO, World Health Organization, on a tear to promote abortion worldwide. They say that this is one of the barriers. If you have parental knowledge or consent laws in a country, that's a barrier. Waiting periods. They tell us that we have to fund it with public fundings. In their documents, this 2012 document is replete. This could have been written by Planned Parenthood. It's a World Health Organization document. So anyone who looks at this language, and especially since it says outcome documents going into the future, those meetings are often hijacked, just like this is being hijacked by the abortion community.
How could these goals, these development goals, sustainable development goals, be used against faith-based organizations, many of them that provide some of the great poverty relief and development on the ground in most of the developing countries?
Raymond, when the President Bush's PEPFAR program, which is now providing about $5 billion a year to fight and combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. It was Henry Hyde's bill. I'm the one who offered the amendment on the floor of the House that was passed that said that there's a conscience clause so that faith-based can participate. Under Clinton, on the smaller program for HIV/AIDS, they were precluded participation. We're seeing it now under Obama, even in the trafficking area. The USCCB, the Catholic bishops, had a great program for helping trafficking victims in the United States, foreigners who came in and needed help. They took that grant away and gave it to groups that will refer for abortion because they've integrated the whole abortion piece as integral to the whole thing. So faith-based groups like Caritas and Samaritan's Purse, Catholic Relief Services, the huge effort and fine effort, they'll be told unless you work around in some way, they'll make it very hard, but they're very likely when these grants are being meted out by governments, including the European Union, the U.S., the whole big surge to give more money to promote this agenda, they'll be left behind because they will not incorporate abortion.
Congressman Smith, both Catholic Relief Services and the Holy See mission to the UN are supporting these goals. They are on record as saying, this is the Holy See, and I quote, "We support the verbatim inclusion of the Sustainable Development Goals and targets." Those are the two targets that we just discussed. What's happening here with the Holy See and Catholic Relief Services, Frank?
I am profoundly disappointed in that language. We're in contact with the Vatican, my staff and I, and others who are concerned about this.
And what do they say?
My wife Marie, for well over a year and a half, that this type of language, it wasn't all crystallized then, but it was getting close to it, even though it doesn't use the word abortion. And Archbishop Sorondo said in an interview that, oh, see, there's no mention of abortion. Look at all of the other evidence, especially in the UN bureaucracy, that defines these concepts, reproductive rights, as meaning abortion on demand. And
reproductive health.
So we can't put our head in the sand and suggest, because the word is not explicitly mentioned, that it's not in there, and it's in there in a very powerful way. I'm very worried about what the indicators, the next shoe that will drop. There's targets, goals, 169 targets, 17 goals, and then there's these indicators that will be hundreds of them. They will be surging the abortion agenda. God willing, we can stop it somehow for the next 15 years, and whole countries will be at risk. Right now, the UN Population Fund in Malawi, in Africa, has just come out and said they're going to pay for the effort to bring down their right to life law and replace it with a pro-abortion law and provide them technical assistance in drafting the language. That's what the UNFPA has been doing all over the world, and they'll be part of the engine driving this whole agenda.
See, it doesn't make sense. It's not consistent, because you have Pope Francis saying, as he travels about the world, this is ideological colonization, is what he would call this, what he has called this. And yet, you have the Holy See signing on to these goals with no caveats, no carve-outs. They did issue this statement that said, we would oppose the imposition of targets and indicators on countries and peoples whose laws and values are contrary to them. But after you already sign on to the
again,
targets...
there's language in here that says it's called the Cairo caveat. And in the Cairo document, it said, according to national law. But they also have language in the target that says, and the outcome documents. So as the outcome documents are increasingly politicized by the abortion lobby, and they are very powerful at the UN. They don't have a constituency in a lot of other places, but they have it there. And matter of fact, since Cairo 20 years ago, incrementally, they have grown their presence in a huge way. So much so that all of these documents from World Health Organization and else, you could just put it side by side with Planned Parenthood and said, they're identical. They're literally identical. And that's why I'm so concerned about the Vatican's lack of leadership when it came to saying those targets have to be significantly amended, dropped completely would be the best case, because we're going to rue the day, frankly, and we're going to be in this battle for the next 15 years to try to mitigate the damage that's being done right now.
Well, and people don't realize these UN documents are used as precedent in international law, and we've even seen them invoked in our own high court as somehow precedent setting. So they do matter. When will this finally be decided? Well, and might the Holy See be waiting to stage a floor fight at that time?
Just to give you an idea how John Paul II handled it. He had regional meetings, and I was at one of those in Peru. And he had all of these bishops, archbishops, pro-life activists throughout Latin America, all the Americas, North and South and Central, as well as lawmakers. And there was a great rallying cry for the unborn and for real development aid. To make it a long story short, all of that agenda gets hijacked by the pro-abortionists who consider an unborn child, like Planned Parenthood does, to be tissue that could be destroyed and wanted only for its utility in selling its body parts. That mindset is lethal to a generation of kids. If you want to know where this all could head, just look at China. The UN has backed the Chinese program for, I offered the First Amendment in 1984 to defund the UN Population Fund, and it passed. Bottom line is, you know, population control is a major part of what's included in here, but the abortion part is the one that I think we all have to be deeply concerned about. And every country in the world now, particularly pro-life countries, have to be on guard because this surge could be overwhelming. And when it's linked to funding, and faith-based groups now are disqualified from getting funded because they refuse to capitulate, it really will be a serious outcome for the next 15 years. So, but mid-September, latter part of September, when the heads of state make their statements, we already know what they'll proclaim, that this historic document is transformative. This is where we're going now for the next 15 years.
Congressman Chris Smith, thanks for being
Raymond,
here.
thank you.